So our next speaker is Andrew Kinch, who's the founder of GameAware. So Andrew's aim is to help parents, schools, professionals, and most importantly, gamers themselves, understand what it takes to hit the gaming sweet spot, where we don't play beyond the benefits, which can be problematic, but also how to get the most out of the experience to suit the many motivations that bring people to play video games. GameAware hopes to educate young gamers to better understand themselves in order to become self-regulating and empower parents to better support their kids. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mike. How are you? Hey, everybody at home. I guess my hope tonight is to help give you a bit of insight, because this is a really largely misunderstood hobby. And I'm going to say it's largely misunderstood by parents, and that's probably a fair statement. It's actually largely misunderstood by many professionals as well. But what a lot of people probably don't realize is that a lot of gamers don't really understand it either. They understand their experience, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. And I guess my aim is to try and bridge that gap. So I got a little presentation for you here. Let me just share that. Okay. So gaming in Australia. Now, I have to say that some of the stats I'm going to show you tonight are actually quite consistent with what I've seen in North America as well. So it's not just here. But some of these might surprise you. So 34 years old is the average age for gamers in this country. And the vast majority of gamers in this country are actually adults. Now, it's not just everybody playing Fortnite, by the way. These are all video games that across the spectrum. And 2/3 of the whole country plays as well. So that includes your grandma playing Candy Crush. And pretty much every home with kids has video games. So they're pervasive. And I think that parents are understanding this, especially during our pandemic. 45% of gamers are female, and the breakdown of the 2/3 of the country is about 90 minutes a day for males and 71 minutes for females. But in terms of, what we would consider a largely problematic age, if we're talking about the 15 to 24-year-old boys, it goes up to about 130 minutes. And it's the last time they did this survey, it was actually higher, which is confusing to me. But what's also significant about this group is that 12% of it is playing more than 4 hours a day, and these stats were done before the pandemic. And as you are probably well aware, our gaming time has gone up. And there's also something else that I always like to lead off with this, because there was a great study done by Dr. Shabilsky from Oxford, which basically said, that there is a value add to playing video games. If you go from no gaming to about an hour a day, there is a boost to your well-being. And then from my understanding of the study, between the first hour and then the second hour up to the third hour, it doesn't really get any better and it doesn't really get any worse, but then it kind of drops off a cliff after 3 hours. That's what they came up with in their study. And I find this consistent with the gamers that I work with and the families that I work with, because a lot of gamers, not all, are playing to perform. They're playing to compete, and you can't keep your top level of focus for hours and hours and hours on end. So at some point your focus is going to waver, and other things, as we'll talk a little bit about later, other things will sort of fall to the wayside. So why is it all so huge? What's all the fuss? Well, to do anything around that, I think I need to talk about motivation. So this is kind of why we do anything. This is a great theory that I engage with all the time. It's called self-determination theory. And if we understand that motivation is the energy for action, then we are motivated to feel competence in our lives. So we have a need to feel mastery. We want to see measurable progress. We like just to be good at stuff, right? And another need that we have, if you want to consider these things, think of them as 3 buckets that we try to fill, okay? And we're always trying to fill these buckets. Whether or not we are is another question. And so the second bucket then would be autonomy. And autonomy is really about self-direction. It's about, that agency, that freedom that we want over our choices. And if we think about, our teenagers out there, this is the age where they're fighting for that autonomy. They're fighting for that independence. They want to be able to do what they want to do. And, this is probably where the source of all this teenage friction with parents outside of gaming, kind of comes from. And then the third bucket that we try to fulfill is relatedness, which is basically social connection. But I like to focus on the idea that it's a sense of belonging and being part of something bigger than you, being part of a community. And there's certainly a gaming community out there. So I guess the important thing to understand here is that video games do a fantastic job of addressing every category, and the accessibility of video games and the fact that they're designed directly, really easy to hit those categories, but not not fill the cups, not on their own. And so, that makes us think about the difference between the pleasure and the desire that we get from, dopamine-rich activities, things that make us feel that pleasure and reward, but also that desire for more of it, versus feeling fulfilled and topped up. Those types of experiences that you might be able to relate to. Like I give an example often of, if you're at a cafe with a friend that you haven't seen in a long time, you're catching up over coffee after 6 months. When you walk out the door and go your opposite directions, you don't turn around and immediately call back to them and say, hey, that was awesome, let's go back inside. But if you're playing Fortnite, it's hard to decide when to stop playing, so there's a big difference. And the other thing that's important to understand is that gamers are going to gravitate to the games that serve their unsatisfied needs the most. So I like to come at it from understanding, where the deficit is, and then understanding the games that they're playing and the purpose of those games. So the value proposition is the anticipation of need satisfaction or needs fulfillment. Something else I think motivates us is chasing flow states. Now, I don't think that video games can provide the same level of flow state that someone who's surfing a wave can feel. Like that is next level kind of stuff. But it's certainly close enough to the flow states and being in the zone that traditional sports can provide us. And I've experienced it on both levels, at a high level of sport and a high level of gaming, that it can be very, very similar, just without the heart rate being raised as much. And so the thing is that there are certain genres out there that really feed to this. And so a lot of kids are playing competitive multiplayer games, as you may be aware of. And then there's also those linear games. I don't know if you've heard of Beat Saber, for example, but there's music going on and you have to like do things in rhythm and in timing. And that can sort of create that rhythm and play and sometimes result in a flow state once you've had lots of practice. But the other type of motivation that I find is the most troublesome is the fact that one of our other motivators is to seek this relief from psychological discomfort, from physical discomfort. Just we want to, it's the painkillers out there. And so video games can seem like a painkiller if they're doing it as a coping mechanism. Okay, if they're playing video games to hide from something that's really tough in real life, as Dr. Carl Gregg talked about before, if someone is hiding from an actual anxiety disorder in game, it's a great distraction. And there's all sorts of other ways where you feel like you're meeting your needs, and that's great for short periods of time. But if you are escaping, and video games have their their mechanics, depending on what kind of games, you could be vulnerable to creating a problem there. So not all games are created equal, though. I'm just going to show you a little continuum here that I like to put out. So if you want to say that on one end of the continuum, we've got games that are engaging, and in the other end, we've got games that are compulsive, all right? You may not know all these titles here, but I'll try and lay it out for you. I would say that a traditional sport is on the far end of the continuum for engagement. In terms of meeting your psychological needs of competence, autonomy, and relatedness, sports, especially team sports, are great at doing this. Games like Minecraft, popular across all ages, really, not just young ones, are very much based around creativity, and that kind of meets autonomy needs quite well because you have that self-direction. Esports titles might have some elements of compulsion in them, but really they're almost mimicking sports. Fortnite and other battle royale games, they're competitive, there's a lot of skill, there's a lot of engagement involved, but there's also mechanics that we don't have time to go into tonight, but there's also mechanics involved that can keep you feeling conditioned to repeat your actions quite often. There's another one here that I'd say Fortnite has that built into the game, whereas NBA is a sports game, and it's a great sports game with all these other things on the side that they're compulsive sort of mechanics. Okay, they're similar to, I think there's, if I remember correctly, there's actually a spinning wheel, almost like what you would find at a casino to try and get a prize, for example. So there's some relationships to gambling sometimes. Destiny is a kind of game where one of your outcomes, one of your goals is to beat bosses, let's say, and then get random things out of it. And so, there's a variable reward mechanic that keeps us guessing. We love that mystery. We love that uncertainty extends the novelty of the experience that you're having. And then I would say that games like Candy Crush or any freemium mobile game that makes, Candy Crush has on many occasions made over $2.2 million a day. And it's a free game. So how does that happen? It's not a very good game either if you want to compare it to some of the games we find on that end. So there are some, and then a Poke Machine will be right on the end of that continuum. So yeah, the engagement side of the continuum is about fulfilling your needs as best you can in game, or at least trying to. And then the compulsion side are very much that conditioning, those conditioning mechanics that you'll see that make you repeat tasks. And the thing is, even if your needs aren't being met, or even if you're not fully enjoying it, it kind of feels like a job sometimes. It kind of feels like you want to keep going. Okay, so just a little idea of what I see, and this is what maybe a lot of parents might have seen before or during or after COVID. We'll see the same thing, I think. I call it redlining. And it's kind of the snowball effect of playing too much. So if you want to use my little analogy here of a car and your RPMs, if you rev them too high, you might blow the engine. And in this case, RPMs are for rewards per minute. And you get them, and that's great from playing exciting video games. But if you overplay, it's like redlining your RPMs. You're stressing your engine. And one of the things, there's lots of terms for this, but you can basically get dopamine exhaustion. So your ability to soak up the reward and pleasure and feedback that you want to get from those games, it diminishes over time. You adapt. So you don't want to overplay because you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak, because you're ruining the experience for yourself. That's one of the things I like to teach the gamers and the families that I work with. And the frustration that we see, which a lot of people, the frustration that we see, that it comes from feeling incompetent in the game. It's from trying to fulfill one of those core needs we discussed, and expecting to, but not being able to. And if you play too much, you might not be able to concentrate enough, and then you won't be able to hit those needs. And then that frustration is what leads to aggression, way more so than any, I guess, opinions I would say in my experience about the violent content creating aggression. Frustration definitely creates aggression. So video games can definitely lead to that. But so can sports. Serena Williams yelling at a ref and people smashing rackets. It happens as well for the same reasons. And then, of course, if you're redlining too much, there's definitely a risk of disengaging when we're fooled into thinking that games can fulfill our needs as well as real life, and that's just not true. So how long should we be playing? Look, it's, it kind of similar to the concept of, it's age doesn't define maturity. In this case, it's not about the time that you spend playing, it's about the motivation. So understanding the motivation is the first point. I still think that just to not make it a habit, just don't play every day. And that's not as easy to do. Like, there's a lot of education that comes into play to try and convince a gamer why they don't want to play every day, and to support the family and helping that happen. But my experience has been that I like to try and, on average, if a gamer maxes out at 3-hour sessions, then they're educated to know that, past 2.5 hours, and this is for teenagers, by the way, you're probably not going to be able to feel fulfilled if you keep going. It's going to get worse. You're going to want to keep playing, and you're not going to be able to get what you want. So this is what we talk about when we say playing beyond the benefits, right? And also taking a few days off during that week will really help the prevention of that dopamine exhaustion, so that you space it out a little bit. You make the experience more fun. And in some of the approaches that I've taken with competitive gamers, that some of them find that they compete better as well because they've got a clear head and they've learned more thoroughly, let's say. And of course, that these times that I'm giving here, that's definitely a pre-COVID sort of number, and we just adapt it on a case-by-case basis for families. But that's definitely sort of where I find the sweet spot is. So what can we do right now? Just to close it out for you guys. I'm going to give you 3 simple tips that you can do right now with your families. And the first one is get involved. Sit down with them, get coached. You don't have to like it. You might not, you probably won't like it. Doesn't matter. They will feel valued if you take interest in their passion, just like if you took interest in their art passion or their soccer or basketball passion. Again, you don't have to cheer for them when they're competing in games, but just be a teammate and not an opponent. and you'll find that the conversation changes drastically just from that first one. Support social gaming. If you can go out of your way, especially post-COVID, to have friends come over or to send your kid to another buddy's house to actually play shoulder to shoulder, sitting in the same room, which is more inconvenient, but way more worth it. The experience is the highest quality of gaming that I think you can have socially. And it is very much about socializing. It doesn't matter that they're looking at the screens, and it presents you with an opportunity to pivot to something else because they're actually there together. So go see a movie, go get some food, go to the park, play some ball. So support social gaming. Go out of your way to do it if you can, and you'll earn definite. I guess the credit system really should be that they're earning your brownie points from you, but it does work the other way too, I think. It's harder for them to disagree with you if you're supporting that, I think. And then another tool that you can use is just free on the website. You can go check out the gamers page. There's a quiz for gamers on that page, as well as a quiz for parents on the parents page. And there's a bunch of content there that I think is just good for everybody to know about gaming intelligently, so you can kind of get the most out of the experience without overplaying and create space for everything else that you need to achieve and accomplish as you're developing into an adult, or even as an adult trying to stay developed as an adult. I don't know. And so I guess the last thing I would say is that the approach that I think works, and all the time that I've spent in the last 6 years working with families to do this, it's really about, you can't expect a teenager to self-regulate fine, especially younger kids. You can't expect them to do that just on their own, but teaching self-regulation with training wheels and supporting them with strategies, that is definitely achievable and has been, I guess, my bread and butter. So self-regulation with training wheels, guys. Because the main point here is, if we don't teach them how to do that now, if they don't know how to pump the brakes for themselves, then it's when they become adults and move out on their own and they don't have those skills, that's when we see a lot of problematic gaming. So thanks very much.
Andrew. That's fantastic. A really fascinating presentation. I was really taken by some of those statistics and just how widespread gaming is. But I particularly love how you've framed gaming as a real positive if it's done in the moderate amounts, and I think that moderation obviously is key, and looking at what some of those underlying motivations are. If someone's avoiding emotions by diving into gaming, what conversations can be had, or how can we support young people to find ways of exploring those feelings rather than burdening them in games, but also recognising those benefits with socialisation and autonomy, competency, like you described as well, was great. So thank you so much.